welcome Cynthia, welcome Klaus. And we are having two other panelists present in a remote way. I hope so. I can't see them on my screen. Yes, they are coming. They are not coming. They are already there. And before I introduce the panelists, let me just say a few words to the topic of this panel of the day. You may have realized when reading the program that we do have two overarching topics, themes. Cities today, emotions tomorrow. And cities is a topic which is à la mode, if I may say so. Many people are focusing on cities and their role, their developments, their laboratory functions. At the same time, if we think about cities and their contribution to peace, quite some people may ask, well, why cities? Isn't this a task for states? And the answer would be, well, of course, states are very relevant, but states are not abstract entities. They exist as a frame, as a unit, which also consists of subparts. And within states, cities belong to the most important of these subparts, and we want to shed light, to focus this afternoon on these subparts of states, their challenges and their contributions possibly to peace. And for this, we do have our guests here who will also be present in other formats this afternoon. So this panel of the day is more as a collective appetizer, if I may call it so. We will give hints about possible topics, but we will not be able, for time reason, but also not be willing to deepen too much these questions, because otherwise we would be spoilers for what will be happening later on. So let me briefly introduce the four panelists, and for reasons of politeness, I will start with the remote panelists. Sara Trewhitt, welcome. Sara, she is Director of Operations of City of Sanctuary in the UK. Before this, she has been working for various UN agencies and non-governmental organizations. Then we also do have Helen Margetts. Welcome, Helen. Helen is Professor of Society and the Internet at the University of Oxford, and she is also Director of an Institute for Data Science and Artificial Intelligence. And then I come to the two panelists present here. To my right, first, Klaus Kraemer, who is Managing Director of the Sight and Life Foundation, a nutrition think tank, if someone wouldn't know the Sight and Life Foundation. And he's also adjunct associated professor at the School of Public Health in Baltimore in the USA. And finally, Cintia Jaime. I pronounce it the French way. I hope this is okay.
That sounds perfect.
Okay. Cynthia is a social entrepreneur and co-founder of the foundation SVCIS, a Swiss-based NGO which is active in the field of rural-urban migration challenges. We will hear more about this later on. And let me start this panel of the day with the same chronology I introduced the panelists. So, Sara, what is a city sanctuary?
Hi, welcome. Thank you so much for having me today. So a city of sanctuary is, just in the UK context, slightly distinct from that which you might be familiar from the US context. But it's essentially a place that seeks to serve as a welcoming, holistically accepting community for all sorts of new arrivals. Our focus has principally been on people who have been fleeing war and persecution, i.e. refugees or people who are seeking asylum. But we think that the work that we try and do to promote community-wide responses of support for those arrivals have important implications for migrants who cross boundaries for all kinds of reasons. And the work that we do is principally with local civic organizations, everything from local government structures to museums, to libraries, to schools. And we also work with specifically a network of about 120 small community grassroots refugee supporting organizations. So while cities is in our title, and we started in a city 15 years ago in Sheffield in the north of England, it's now spread out across the UK into all types of communities. So we are in London, Manchester, Liverpool, the big cities, as well as small communities like villages here in the Yorkshire Dales, which is where I live. So there's an interesting cross-section about how larger cities can help inform smaller places to understand trends in new arrivals and how diversity is expanding across all types of communities in the UK.
Thank you very much, Sara. If I may just follow up quickly with one question. I mean, there is one element which really struck me at the end of your input. I mean, I would assume in a country like Switzerland, there's also, I think, some reality to this, that larger, bigger cities tend to have a more open view, or at least a different view on issues of migration than smaller one. But I mean, probably in Switzerland, our largest cities are like your smaller ones. But I mean, you know, just as a matter of principle, I mean, how does this work?
Yeah, so what I would say to that is, yes, I think traditionally, I mean, cities have always been places where people mingle and you have influxes of new arrivals who come there and you know, seeking communities. But what we've seen, particularly in the UK and within the City of Sanctuary movement, is that there's been this expansion. I think this really took off probably around 2015. At sort of the height of the refugee crisis, the UK government of the time agreed to a certain resettlement figure. And so what we saw is a commitment on the part of the government to start to resettle individuals into smaller communities. And at that moment, we've had a huge increase in the number of groups. So what's an interesting dynamic at play? So I used to live in London, a big metropolitan area. About 5 years ago, I moved to a small market town in the north of England. And we only had a few refugee families that were settled here at the time. We've had an increase over the last 5 years. There's now 8 families that live here. And in that time, what we've tried to do is offer the support to those families to allow them to integrate. But we've worked really hard across the community, with local churches, with the schools, with the theater, to try and have other civic institutions understand why this displacement's happened, what's going on in the context of people's movement globally, and what does that mean in the UK context. Particularly, I think, as we'll delve into more, no doubt, in the workshop that I'm participating in, the UK has, in recent times, at the national level, taken a very hostile approach to immigration, and so that is reflecting a tension that exists within the country, because at the community level, what we're seeing is that individuals, groups, and civic organizations are offering a real warm welcome to new arrivals, and yet there's a tension within what's happening at the national sphere. And then how we can, as an organization that works across and between different types of organizations, how we can help mediate and support communities to understand how it's beneficial for everyone if new arrivals are included and integrated, because it helps promote a wider sense of community cohesion.
Thank you very much, Sara. Helen, as a second topic of this afternoon, and of course you as a second expert taking part in the forum, data science, artificial intelligence, I mean, some people are totally fascinated about these things, and they also believe it will help settle many problems, maybe even problems we don't yet know about, but they will know them before we do, and we won't even realize anymore these problems might have existed. On the other side, these themes also cause troubles, because certain people assume, you know, there is artificial intelligence in things where there isn't, but they see it as a threat. So this is your field. What is your contribution regarding these issues?
Thank you. Yes, well, I at the moment have a large program of research at the Alan Turing Institute for Data Science and AI. You actually promoted me just then. So just in case the real director of the Alan Turing Institute is listening, I direct the public policy program of research at the National Institute. And in the public policy program, what we basically do is try and develop data science and AI from a public sector perspective. We try to develop the kind of AI that we believe will work for the public good, help governments to make better decisions, design better services. We also do a lot of work on ethics and responsible innovation, working out how kind of AI-powered decisions and services can be fairer, more transparent, more accountable, more kind of citizen-centric. So when the pandemic started, for example, there was so much talk of data and modeling, you know, right down our alley, that we had very high expectations of how these things might help during the pandemic. For example, and I'll just mention a couple, but I mean, data science is very good for simulation, for example, for creating kind of simulations of using data to make simulations of, say, cities or spatial areas or some kind of, or the economy or some policy area, and then try out policy interventions without actually experiencing any unintended consequences if they don't work. So that might have been used for, say, looking at what the effects of a lockdown would be, or looking at the effects of closing schools, for example, rather than just doing it and seeing what happened. Also, with respect to measurement, machine learning and AI are really good for kind of measuring trends and patterns of behavior, or detecting criminal behavior or something like that. Like, for example, during the pandemic, there was a kind of infodemic of disinformation about health and the pandemic and how to treat coronavirus. There was also what the World Health Organization called a tsunami of hate speech, particularly against East Asian people. These technologies are also very good for prediction. They could potentially, and in many ways were used for predicting where the next outbreak would be or something like that. And finally, they were, from the point of view of ethics, these technologies, because they're powered by data, have the real possibility to make explicit some of the inequities and unfairness that happen during a crisis, and perhaps particularly pandemics, which has left us with spiraling levels of inequality. Just one tiny example is that, you know, the data emerging in the UK has identified that the kind of oxiometers that we use work less well on dark skin than they do on paler skin, thereby directly feeding in to inequality. So, as I say, excited isn't the right word. Nobody was excited at the beginning of the pandemic, but we did have high expectations of how these technologies might help. And I think we're left with a feeling of could do better next time, really, because there are all sorts of ways these technologies could have been used, and actually we kind of failed to use them. So in our panel, I hope to talk a bit about what the barriers were to these technologies being used in this public good way, and how we might overcome them for.
Thank you very much, Ellen.
For the next crisis.
Yeah. When preparing the panel, Ellen and I exchanged briefly on what does it mean in a nutshell to say something about this topic. I think this was excellent. Thank you very much. Before moving on now to not to the real panelists, but to the physically present panelists, let me just say something in view of the Q&A session, which will also be part of this panel. So all of you have the possibility towards the end to ask questions. And when I'm saying all of you, you may ask yourself, well, why are you saying this? Well, the fact is the people who are present here, you will have the possibility to ask questions in a conventional way. There will be someone walking around with a microphone. And also the people who are virtually following the session, they will have the possibility in the platform to ask questions, and these questions will be forwarded to me. So I will be aware of all the questions asked. Maybe we will not have time to answer all questions, but be aware that independent of the way you are following this session, you will have the possibility to ask questions. But now, Klaus, you're coming from a slightly different field, from the field of nutrition, as I mentioned when I introduced you before. So as an entry question into this field, I mean, nutrition, I think, has traditionally been seen as something very individual, almost private. You eat what you think you want to eat. But recently, there have been more public debates also about different diets, almost certain ideologies developing around food habits. Some people thinking that the way they eat, through this, they will also have an impact, a bad one or a good one, on the world on a more global scale. So, Klaus, is this like this? Is it so easy? Is it more complex?
Yeah, regrettably, it's more complex because we have many different diets, as you rightly say, and some diets are more plant-based, others are vegan, others are more animal-based, and all these diets, they have different contributions to human nutrition status and health. So we have also different forms of malnutrition. We have undernutrition, which is stunting when a child is not growing to its normal height, and we have children that are severely underweight. And these are risks for child mortality in low and middle income countries specifically. But on the other hand, we also have more than 2 billion people overweight and obese. And so the diet is largely contributing to human health and development. But the diet is also a matter of choice of people. You can make good choices, you make bad choices, you make a conscious choice to eat more plant-based food because of a risk that is related to animal source food, to non-communicable diseases like cancer and cardiovascular disease. But on the other hand, you have to see that there are now many products in the market, meat alternatives or dairy alternatives, where we really don't know what is the quality. Are they safe? Are they healthy? There's a lack of research and understanding of that. So we want consciously to make a contribution to climate-smart nutrition, but we have to accept there may be some drawbacks and unintended consequences also on our health. And that is something where we here need to really to talk in larger audiences that diets are important for human nutrition and health. They make a contribution to greenhouse gas emission. So the food systems only contributes 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. So it's part of the problem. But climate change is, on the other hand, also contributing significantly to food and nutrition insecurity. And here we have started recently working with support from SDC in a Swiss consortium with the Swiss Tropical Institute, ETH Zurich, and the Syngenta Foundation on food systems transformation in secondary cities. Now I'm getting to the other topic, cities. Using cities as an entry point for food systems transformation, because cities, not the mega cities specifically, has been chosen because of the complexity, but secondary smaller cities where you have the ability to analyze what goes into the market and what is consumed, and where you also have the ability to generate demand for better, more healthier dietary choices. And I think these topics are all interrelated. We have to assume the complexity of them and try to find separate systems that we can influence. And working in food and nutrition, you're working through all systems, basically. It has to do with culture, with economy, it has to do with human health, and it has to do with the biology of people. So there's a need for all of us to talk around these systems and try to find the best solution for human nutrition, health, but also the economy and the environment, and balance all of that.
Thank you very much, Klaus. So should anybody have asked him or herself why nutrition was part of this afternoon's program, I think the answer has been given. And I hope the interest triggered even further. Cynthia, we have now been taking this movement towards increased urbanization, people fleeing rural parts of countries towards the urban centers as a given, almost as a deterministic development. Now you are working, if I may say, teasing you a little bit, against this trend, or do I misread your work?
No, absolutely not. Hello, everyone, and thank you for the invitation. It's really a pleasure to share what we are doing and our vision. We will let to believe that the future of the humanity lives in the cities, in the urban areas. And this is exactly what causes all the overcrowd we have, because on the last decades there were a lot of investment doing on the cities for making them, after the urban agenda of 2016, there was an encouragement to invest in the cities and in the urbanization. And this automatically increased the population on the cities, because on the other half, imagine that we have 55% of people living in urban areas, 45% of people living in rural areas, and this imbalance of investments in the last decades, what did is that on the side which is left with no modernization, no investment, they were pushed on the last decades to move to the urban areas. So we have the overcrowd, because what is wrong with the cities? Really nothing wrong with the city except when they are overcrowded. So we work against the mainstream. So we say, well, let's work on the, and listen to that, 96% of the land is rural and 4% of the land planet is urban. Say, let's work on the other half. No, it's on the 96%. What happened with the people there? So we will try now we had an idea, a program, and then we implement this program to prove that when you revitalize villages with resettlement of urban families in a village, then this village can flourish again, can grow sustainably. And for this, we need to blow the logic of the past, the thinking of rural is only agribusiness. And we went beyond that in services and products, matching the opportunities of this village, and of course, harnessing the technology potential that exists. We live in a different world than in the last century. And this is today, and accelerated by pandemics by far, that we can live wherever we want to live when you have minimal infrastructure and technology available. So this, I don't say any village can be repopulated like that, but when you have a region with potential, you can harness this potential, because a reparator machine dies, and they don't know how to address this shortage. A medical doctor is needed. On both sides, they don't know where to go, and they don't know how to address. And then we started to be like breaching these opportunities from one side, and the willingness of the people of going out of the village. And imagine that with only one call, we got in 4 weeks 20,000 families applying for going to a village. And now, with the pandemic, of course, increases tremendously. This is a huge, we proved these voices were not heard, that there was one direction working on only urbanization, and that is what we call the neo-ruralization, thinking in rural areas beyond agribusiness, taking, rephrasing again the potential of our planet, and of course, using these systems, right? Urban and rural, they are connected. The more the imbalances of investment on urban areas will bring automatically more migration. This is like a pull on one side. We had cities, 80% of global, consume the 80% of the global energy. They can generate the 70% of the waste. And the gas emissions is the 60%. Only the half of population does that. On the other half, life is more sustainable. They want to grow. The overdue and neglected investments, there are a lot of movements, Spain, La España vaciada, in Latin America, there is a lot of overdue investment there, which disbalance automatically because these villages go in a spiral of decline. So with a new vision of the planet, and taking into account the 96% of our planet, and seeing this half of population can flourish and the people can come back, we will automatically, by decreasing the overcrowd, solve the many problems that the overcrowd in the urban areas are creating.
Thank you very much, Cynthia, for these explanations. I will, for the last 10 minutes we have as a panel before we open the Q&A session, reverse back to Sara briefly. I mean, when you listen to Cynthia's explanations about their project, I mean, does it fit the logic of the sanctuary city network approach you described before, or do you see things differently? I mean, you were talking about primary cities, secondary cities, and support between them. But actually, if there would be a stronger movement towards the countryside anyway, well, then there would be sanctuaries everywhere. Or what do you think?
Yeah, what you've been speaking about has been so powerful and interesting because we see this dynamic at play. I think also, just even in the course of the pandemic, we've seen a little bit of an exodus. People have recognized that, the importance of nature and being able to go outside. And so here in the UK, we've seen people moving out of some of the larger cities to be able to ensure that they can access it, given all of the expanded opportunities to do work remotely and participate across boundaries and through the internet. So it's a really interesting dynamic. And I firmly believe that there's a huge amount of interest in not just in these larger cities where, for decades, diversity, there's been a great deal of diversity. I would say we're seeing a real changing demographic in many communities across the UK. And it's about harnessing, and there's a lot of fantastic parallels in terms of when you can bring back some of those economic opportunities to sort of smaller cities or smaller places, more rural areas, more people are able to stay. And then some of the tensions that may exist around economic opportunity or concerns about, what housing may look like with new arrivals coming in, some of that can dissipate, and then you can focus on what are the commonalities that people have living within a community. So it's really intriguing to hear, to learn more about, that sort of return to the rural and the implications that could have. I think another interesting element of that is also that in seeing some people making the decision to leave larger cities and go to smaller places, they're also bringing some of those experiences and desires. I mean, having lived, for example, myself in several large cities across the globe, my desire to live in a diverse and welcoming community that I experienced in a big city, it feels even more important to me now in a smaller community. So I've been working, you work harder with those local institutions to encourage them to find ways to be more open and accessible. So I think there's a lot of interesting overlap in promoting that move back to the rural and supporting people to feel safe in new communities.
Thank you, Sara. And when already looking at the screen, Helen, when listening also to what Cynthia presented, I mean, this kind of adapted parship function of demands on the countryside and offers in the urban areas. In terms of data science and artificial intelligence, I mean, one could imagine, like a huge global data set of needs and offers in terms of human beings traveling, linked to their best intentions and wishes to the ideal place, making everyone happy. I mean, this sounds now a little bit exaggerated, but I mean, in terms of now from a methodological point of view, I mean, would you see any logic to such a thinking? I mean if I have a colleague who is an economist, and he once wrote a short essay saying he was in the station in the morning looking at people, and it was fantastic. All these people walking precisely to one specific spot, knowing where they would want to go. And he explained this, being an economist, with the market. Yeah? The market was, organizing this movement in a highly efficient way. So my question bears a certain parallel, but also a difference. Would one think that there could be certain mechanisms which could, govern human placements in this way?
Well, yeah, I'm not sure, that might sound a little bit spooky. We're going to sort of track what everybody's doing in some massive system. But I think, particularly post-pandemic, I think what the pandemic has done is it's thrown lots of things on their head, like Sara was saying, or a couple of the speakers, you don't have to live near where you work necessarily. You don't have to be there to receive public services. In so many ways, it's changed the way we think about sort of work life and home life and where we live and how we travel and so on for, I think, everybody. And I think we're only at the very, very beginning of understanding that. And I think what the pandemic has shown is how important it is to have data about those trends and the new ways of working and living and building them into decision making. I mean, urban planning now, I wouldn't like to be an urban planner right now, because how do you know? How do you know what's going to happen? None of us know. Most of us don't know when we start a day whether half our meetings are online or offline. So I think it's really important to kind of develop ways of understanding that and what the models for planning should be in the future. And that also applies to things like public services, which obviously are also an important part of where you live. I mean, we've always assumed that to see a doctor, it's absolutely essential that you go and sit in a room with a lot of other sick and potentially infectious people and wait time and travel to the surgery and everything. And for some people, that is what they keenly want. But for lots of people, actually, it's much better to be online. And we, in that sense, we should see the pandemic, when sort of for a while in a lot of countries, everyone was virtual. We should use the data from that massive natural experiment we don't need to create a huge system, but we do need to gather the right data to understand what worked, what was good and what was bad, and try and work out the best way of designing services for the future.
Thank you, Helen. A last question on the panel. Now, listening to this kind of beginning, maybe potential, maybe only slightly potential developments, if you reflect this back into effects, impacts on the field of nutrition, are there any spontaneous answers or comments you could give from this perspective?
Yeah, thank you for the question. One item is certainly how to counsel pregnant women, for instance, about good nutrition. And pregnancy is the time of higher demand of quality nutrition to feed the fetus, and specifically vitamins and minerals, or micronutrients as we name them, are important, and the demand is increasing. And if we have tools for distant counseling, and in low and middle income countries, pregnant women are expected to go to the antenatal care clinic, which is sometimes a very long travel, and the vehicles don't exist, or they cannot pay for a taxi or a motorbike to get there when they are pregnant, then the distant counsel would be very important, and also for collecting data on how the pregnancy is progressing, and entering in a cloud the data on the weight of the woman during pregnancy. Is she increasing adequately the weight? And using this specific data for counseling on dietary choices to improve them. But at the same time, if we would have the ability, we have to do it, women have to be able to afford that kind of food. And affordability is a real issue, that's a real injustice that is happening globally, that 3 billion people cannot afford a healthy diet, which constitutes grains, legumes, fruit, vegetables, some dairy, some meat or offals to nourish people. And that is something where we are working on to find solution to it, but using data to better inform how we can counsel women during pregnancy, or linking refugees, as the World Food Programme does, to the right retail store where they can redeem against the cash transfer that they receive the right kind of food that is nourishing women during pregnancy, for instance. So data is extremely important, and data collection, data mining, and processing data that is tailored to human needs, I think this is a huge opportunity.
Thank you very much, Klaus. So now I'll turn towards the audience in presence and virtually. I don't see any virtual questions yet, so let's open to the physical public first. Who would like to ask a question? Yes, please, over there. Maybe you could just briefly say your name and the institution, that's all. Yeah.
Okay, my name is Marie-Christine Ibaguire. I was a refugee from Rwanda to the UK, and I've been living in the UK for 25 years. I have also been running an organization for refugees, and I did some studies and researches on refugees. I'm a refugee advocate. So I'd like to talk on the city of sanctuary and nutrition in relation to refugees. So most of the time, refugees like to live in cities because I have to make a difference between a refugee and a migrant. So a migrant is someone who chooses to go where he wants to go. But a refugee is someone who is forced to go, to flee. And most of the time, they don't know where they go. They don't know what is there. For example, in my case from Rwanda, I landed in London. I did not know anyone there. I was not speaking the language. The culture was new to me. It was a shock. And I was coming from camps, slums in Africa, where I did not have food. So when I arrived in the UK, in London, it was like heaven to me. There was lots of food. That's what happens with refugees. When they arrive in cities, coming from a starving place, they want to eat any and everything. So they don't choose which one is healthy and which one is not healthy at that time. That's what we realize. After some time, some months, those refugees, they become obese, or they become diabetic. They can't control what they eat because no one is there to teach them what is good and what is not good. Luckily, in cities like London, they can find daily food from home. Mm-hmm. There are markets for African food where you can feel yourself comfortable to eat what you are used to eat. But other places like where Sara was talking about, let's say in New York, there's no Africa. It's very hard to find African food there. It's very hard to find what we are used to eat there. So when you move refugees from those places, I'd like to say there would be a risk of them not being able to eat healthy food, therefore having health problems. But do you plan to have any briefing or any mentoring on those kind of areas of nutrition? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Maybe we take another question if there is just one in the same area.
Yeah.
No? Yes, please, Cynthia.
I would like to address something about the difference you make between the refugees and the other migrants. I rather believe that all of the people that are pushed by any reason, economic reason or political reasons, push factors that they have to abandon the place they are living due to difficult circumstances, such as climate change, flood, or whatever. They have similar experiences. I worked in the sector of displacement or people that are pushed to go out for reasons which are related to economics. And there are actually 1 billion people that also, without refugee status, live and they don't know how to eat or what to eat. They arrive to the urban areas and they are there just in a very poor and unsafe conditions, regarding also to critical situations. So I understand there is like refugees in the addressing the situation is like two status, refugees and no refugees, but at the base of the situation, all migrants which is push factors, they go in the uncertain and they cross 6 out of 10 people arriving to Europe come immigrants with non-refugee status, and it's for economic reasons. They come in the same places, they risk their lives, and also happens that when they go to America, etc. There is a very, in the deep, it is very difficult if we don't tackle situations forward exactly where the problem starts and try to help this system, the system that expulses that, because it's very, very hard for all these people, this displacement, these push factors. Only to say there is not such a difference as once believed.
Thank you very much, Cynthia. So now we have many questions, virtual ones, and we have like 7 minutes left. So we try to be short in our answers, and yeah. I try to be short in my comments or moderation inputs. So the first one is addressed to Helen, I think, but the person also says other panelists would also be allowed to answer. But it's Sanjay Prasad, someone from India, and saying that there are many conflicts in cities in this region related to inadequate civic infrastructure facilities, like water supply, pollution. And the person wonders to what extent you think that tools like artificial intelligence could help improve such situations. So, I mean, when there is an inadequacy between demand and offer and the quality, obviously, also of services in well, not perfectly economically developed regions. Do you have a short answer on this?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that both agent computing and machine learning, both forms of data science or even sometimes labeled AI, are good at kind of resource allocation, of predicting needs and allocating resources to meet those needs. And that is quite a common use of machine learning. So I would have thought that there were possibilities there, but of course you always have to have the right data, and that can be a really serious challenge.
Thank you very much, Helen. There is another question from Urs Herzog. He's from the area here, and he works with Rotary at the global level also. And they also work, they try to select populations who ask for support. And he's wondering, I think this is a question directed to you, Cynthia, on what basis you actually assess needs and select populations to be supported.
Great, thank you for the question. First is you match opportunities. So for matching opportunities, you did a deep mapping of the village and the region. This is data, we collect that and we ask, we did a mapping, a research, an assessment, and then we call on the other side, we bridge these opportunities with the profiles, meeting the needs of the villages and the region. And in this is like bridging these opportunities and supply and demand is the market.
Yeah, thank you, Cynthia.
You're welcome.
That was also a short answer.
I tried
that
to be very
perfect.
short now.
Perfect. And I think we have one more question we can tackle from Ananda Bolimera. I will read it because it's difficult to shorten right now. She writes, during the lockdown imposed in India due to COVID pandemic in 2020, tens of thousands of migrants have returned back to their homes, many to rural areas. Unfortunately, the urban cities, which are run and live on the sweat and blood of migrants, were given a different treatment, negligence, and largely ignored. Majority of migrants feel they don't belong to the city they are working. What will be the role of the nation, state, government, the corporate and urban communities to deal and respond to such crises with a more human approach? Yeah. So I think, Sara, this should concern you.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think what's quite interesting about the pandemic is it threw up in great relief the fact that so many cities and so many places rely on migrant labor. I mean, we certainly saw it here in the UK with the outpouring of support for the NHS, which is our National Health Service, in those early days, and the recognition that so many of the individuals within that system are migrants, many of who may have come from, may have sought sanctuary and been refugees in the past. So I think there's a few elements here, and I know we have to be concise, but it's just to say that I think in terms of the treatment of those populations, I think in recognizing the value and contribution of them, in working within local institutions that are the pillars of communities, like working with schools or colleges or universities, in the way that we do through the sanctuary movement, we're trying to make a more sort of horizontal cross-section to be able to go and say to our political leadership, this is our communities are founded and run off the backs of people who make movement, and even in places that are rural, that they still exist, and so I think I'm moderately hopeful, given what I've seen over the last couple of years in terms of the expansion of the sanctuary movement within the UK, at the grassroots level, and the number of people who want to become involved, coupled with perhaps a resurgent understanding in the importance of migrant populations to the economic health here in the UK, that together, some of that will bring pressure to bear and change and modify some of the xenophobic rhetoric we're seeing. But I think it's a long-term process, and I think events like this and discussions between and across countries help to bolster some of the solidarity that are required to make those grassroots level movements translate into a more fair system in those larger contexts.
Thank you very much, Sara, and we are perfectly in time. It's 15:15. So thank you. You will all have the opportunity to meet Helen, Sara, Cynthia, Klaus, and many more persons. We only could accommodate 4 for this panel of the day here during the workshop session later this afternoon. Now, we all deserved a first break of 15 minutes. Make sure you are back virtually and physically, and anyway mentally, in 15 minutes for the dual debate on smart cities, the second entity of this unit of this afternoon. Thank you very much to all the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.